Coming up on show 614, loads of Tesla news today, a couple of bits of Ford news. Oh, and SUVs appear to be the devil. There's loads going on, so I'm going to crack on with it. By the way, a quick plug for tomorrow's show, Saturday special interview this week. The interview on Saturday tomorrow is going to be with someone who is fixing the problems with charging. It's not a small problem to fix, but I think he's got the idea, and it's one of those ideas as well. Are you anything like me? Sometimes you hear an idea, or you see an idea, and you go, oh, why didn't I think of that? Yeah, it's one of those ones. A bit like, actually, you know what's coming. My sponsors, myev.com, thank you very much for helping out making this show. The team at MyEV are in the USA buying and selling EVs. Just got so much easier over a year ago when they would start to connect buyers and sellers and helping people learn about them along the way. Check it out at myev.com. A little bit of mopping up from yesterday's programme, by the way, with the Volvo XC40 Recharge, which I still believe is the name they're giving to both the pure electric and the plug-in hybrids. I think if it has a plug, they're going to call the subname the Recharge. Anyway, and a reminder about the XC40. This isn't what we're talking about Polestar, the spin-off brand. This is Volvo's first full electric car. The first of many, by the way. A reminder, 249 miles. That's all right. 78 kilowatt-hour battery, 75 kilowatt-hour usable. That's all right. The Volvo XC40, little fun tidbit from The Verge, which I picked up after I'd recorded yesterday's podcast, but I want to bring it to you. Interestingly enough, they say the battery almost ended up being much, much smaller, with fewer cells and less capacity than what was eventually decided upon. According to Henrik Green, well, he's Volvo's CTO. The company's engineers were halfway through the development cycle of the XC40 pure electric when something happened in the EV space that threw them for a loop. They unveiled the Tesla Model 3. Now, when Volvo learned the Model 3 would have a range of over 300 miles, the company's engineers set to work doing whatever they could to increase their own range. They upgraded the vehicle's battery. They say, well, Henrik says this: "We decided to go for a bigger size than we originally thought. That meant contacting the automaker's battery suppliers, South Korea's LG Chem and CATL in China, to add modules to its battery to improve the performance. If customers wanted electric cars with bigger batteries and longer ranges, Volvo would have to deliver," he said. That was not a fun decision. Being adamant about quality and everything about producing vehicles, doing that very late in the programme was super critical, end quote. But fair play to them. Fair play for not having their blinkers on and just doing what they wanted to do, what they thought would be right in 2020, when the EV market was a very different place to when they were developing the vehicle a few years ago. They saw what Tesla were going to be doing in the Model 3, knowing that price-wise they were going to be swimming with that kind of size fish. Like, okay, we're going to fix this. And I think, 250 miles is good. 248, 249 miles. Which brings me on to the next story, which we'll talk about. That, of course, 248, 249, of course, is more than the Standard Range Plus Model 3. Of course, the XC40 will be a more expensive car, but still it's more. Tesla just added 10 miles of range to the Standard Range Plus. They've not changed the hardware as far as anybody can tell. This is all software updates, playing with algorithms, maybe even giving you access to more of the battery than you had. In other words, it's still the same battery as a car made yesterday, but they've said, okay, you can use a little bit more. There's always a difference between the gross size and the usable battery, right, in EVs. So, it now beats the Volvo XC40 a day after the car was unveiled. I'm sure it's purely coincidental, but the base range Model 3 now does 250 miles, not 240. The update comes amid Tesla's revised delivery window for its vehicle, says Teslarati. Model 3 Standard Range Plus has come with a range boost at a price, another $500. Would you pay $500 for extra 10 miles? I'm not sure I would. I think I'd like the cheaper price in 240. I mean, there are people that are saying, well, if you need the range and you're down to your last 10 miles, you'll be pleased you paid an extra $50 a mile for that. But I'm not so sure. I think a lower price and still a very respectable range of 240. But hey, we're all friends here. We can disagree if you're not quite on the same page as I am. 39,490. So it stays well below. Maybe not well below. It stays below $40,000. In addition to the additional range and the asking price for the Standard Range Plus, estimated delivery times have increased. For example, 6 to 10 weeks now for delivery on Standard Range Plus and Long Range, and Performance model goes to 8 to 10 weeks before the vehicle is ready to be handed over. Vehicles require an extremely affordable $100 now. Non-refundable deposit is different to what was a previously refundable deposit. The solid black paint was $750, now it's $1,000. I think that's the only change that I can pick up on, the only ones that I can pick up on. Oh, and there's some new wheels as well for the Performance. We'll come on to those another time. UK pricing, because much of my audience are in this country, according to Auto Express, the Standard Range Plus has increased by £1,000 to 38,500, and the Long Range goes up £1,000 to 47 grand. The Model 3 Performance has gone up by £2,000 to £52,000. That's before you start speccing anything else like different colours, different wheels. Still 5,007 or 5,008 for the full suite of self-driving. So it's still a very expensive car. All right, let's move on to the Model Y. And a prototype has been spotted in Washington. Sightings continue, by the way, and that's a sign. They're in the advanced phases of road testing the Model Y now. In the state of Washington, long-distance testing's underway, says Electrek. A Model Y prototype is the same one spotted in Fremont yesterday. Was seen at a supercharger station in Vancouver, Washington, via Seamus Johnson on Twitter. The Tesla supercharger in Vancouver is 668 miles away from Fremont, so Tesla's giving some long-distance testing to the pre-production versions of the Model Y. Tesla vehicles generally go through a very extensive test program in many different conditions and climates for about a year before mainstream production starts, and that timeline looks like it's panning out with the Model Y. Well, Tesla was also added to the government list of approved automotive manufacturers of China's industry ministry, they said. They granted the electric vehicle maker a certificate it needs to start production in China. So all the paperwork is now signed off, according to Reuters. The list was published by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. It means that the green light is fully given to Tesla for production in China, says Yao Zhang, head of the Shanghai-based consultancy Automotive Foresight. Tesla can start production any time from now, he said. Well, they intend to produce 1,000 Model 3s a week from Shanghai by the end of this year before they ramp up, trying to avoid higher import tariffs for US cars by making the cars domestically. Between now and the beginning of the year, they won't be, as far as I know, stamping the cars and producing them. They'll be doing more assembly, but they couldn't do anything like that until they actually plugged the factory in. And that's the next bit of news today. Tesla's Chinese Gigafactory is now connected. State Grid Corp of China. State Grid Corp have just opened the transmission line. In other words, they've connected the power. That now means Tesla's plant is up to the job. Apart from the temporary connection that they had, according to a statement from the Chinese company's Shanghai branch, State Grid said it will eventually increase the power supply 8-fold as the production ramps up at Gigafactory 3. What was involved? Well, 55 kilometres of cabling was done to connect the factory, about 17 kilometres of ducting, and it was the quickest installation they've done of that size, taking only 6 months to get the electricity all hooked up. Phase 2 of Gigafactory is now underway, according to a report by China's Global Times. Tesla's completed construction of the first part of Gigafactory 3. Now work begins on Phase 2. Clean Technica quotes Feng Ximing, a veteran analyst of the Chinese auto industry, telling Global Times that he has heard from Tesla employees at Gigafactory 3 the first batch of vehicle batteries for Model 3 will be fully assembled as of 10 days' time. Well, 12 days' time. October 30th. Mass production at the Shanghai factory begins next spring after the festival holidays. Until then, between now and then, parts are shipping in from the US and they are getting assembly underway, but not necessarily the actual production. Let's move on then. Let's talk about Ford. Underpinning the Transit plug-in hybrid is a 1-litre EcoBoost petrol engine and a 92 kilowatt electric motor, 124 brake horsepower, and it's got a range extender. The article I'm reading from is Car Keys when they say this. Interestingly, Ford describes the engine as a range extender, suggesting that they expect drivers to just use electric power for lots of the time. A 13.6 kilowatt hour battery allows for 35 miles of electric range, says Car Keys, and the website says, our only gripe is that as soon as the electricity runs out, you're left with an engine that lacks the punch to move a van. The CVT automatic transmission is acceptable but not smooth or refined. I just wanted to make sure, because Ford call it a range extender, I wanted to make sure they weren't mucking about with definitions. So I did some research today, and when the van was initially announced, I found the press release on Ford.co.uk. They said this, and I quote, "The engine does not directly drive the wheels. Instead, it charges Transit's onboard batteries on the go. Ford is targeting a zero-emission range of 31 miles from full charge, more than enough for most city delivery rounds. If the operator needs to travel further in between charging stops, the EcoBoost engine chips in and it tops up the batteries," end quote. So yeah, kind of interesting. I was reading this article on a car website today, and they started talking about how once your electric power runs out, the engine isn't powerful enough to drive the car. And you're like, well, the van. And I'm like, hang on, you have driven the van, right? Maybe I'm interpreting. It could be me. I could be interpreting what they wrote wrong, because they do lots of reviews and it's a very credible website. So I'm not picking on them. I'm just saying that this is a car outlet, and there's a little bit of confusion around EVs. I'm saying that to highlight the huge education job that needs to be done. Maybe this podcast is doing just a little incy-wincy bit of education along the way. There is so much to do, though, isn't there? My goodness me. It's a long journey. We're on it, and we're looking forward to more people learning more about EVs. Well, South Korea's LG Chem, one of the leading EV battery makers, expects global sales of EVs to grow fivefold from last year's levels to account for 15% of global vehicle sales in 2024, it said yesterday. And Reuters UK says that when they were speaking at a conference in Seoul, LG Chem's battery chief, Kim Yong-hyun, said tighter regulations in Europe and China, especially next year, and the rise of autonomous vehicles will serve as catalysts for the explosive growth of EVs. And yeah, I should probably do a special program at some point on what's happening in Europe from January the 1st. New regulations are kicking in that's all about the total emissions of cars that are sold by each individual car maker. If you know about this, I won't go over it again now. If you don't know about this, I think I need to write something and do very soon, actually. I need to do probably a whole show that talks anyone through this that doesn't appreciate how big a deal this is going to be. The fines, the car makers, if they don't hit the CO2 targets from the cars they're selling from January the 1st onwards, the fines levied by the European Union will run into the billions. And it makes more sense, and this is kind of, I need to sit down and write a proper program about this. It makes more sense to discount your EVs so heavily and sell them at cost or sell them at a loss, at least for some, at least initially, than to pay the fines. And so the floodgates, the closer we get to January the 1st, the more I'm convinced the floodgates will open. And certainly by the middle of next year, when production ramps up by many of those big name car makers. Hey, no more now, but I will. I've decided I'm going to do a proper thing all about the regulations changes that will impact the rest of the world as well, because we heard a story today that I've not put into the podcast, but very quickly, that the Kia Soul EV / the e-Soul, whichever one, whatever it's going to be called in America, won't be in the US until 2021. Shortages of components are being blamed. In other words, Kia are just one of those manufacturers that have to sell every EV they can possibly make. They have to sell them in Europe next year to avoid these very punitive fines. And that does mean other markets won't get those cars. Right, let's move on. Staying with Ford, and here's a headline that caught my eye because it does sound like they've done rather more than they have. The headline is this: Ford introduces North America's largest EV charging network. That does make it sound like they've been out with the spanners and built something. They haven't really. Let me explain. Ford is giving all electric vehicle customers, their future customers, confidence to enjoy hassle-free EV lifestyles, they say, by providing easy access to EV public charging stations, more than any other automaker. Ford is providing 2 years of complimentary access to what they say is what they've made North America's largest network. It's called the Ford Pass Charging Network. And no, they haven't actually built anything. They've done some deals. And it's good news, by the way. I know I sound cynical. I've really got my cynical pants on today. I'll change before tomorrow's show. 12,000 charging stations with 35,000 plugs are accessible to Ford Pass Charging Network members. Public chargers are common as you need them to be. Ford is working with Green Lots to bring together multiple charging providers to be part of Ford Pass Charging Network. It'll be easier to pay through the charging network on your vehicle screen or with the account that you have set up with Ford Pass Charging Network. So all they're doing is they are aggregating access to other people's networks. This is brilliant for future Ford buyers. It solves one of the really big objections to buying an EV. So well done, Ford. And finally, if worldwide demand for SUVs continues to grow at its current pace, the carbon emissions from larger vehicles are set to outweigh the current benefits of electric vehicles. A new study from the International Energy Agency found today the number of SUVs on the road around the world has grown by 35 million, from 35 million in 2010 to 200 million last year in just 7 years. It's a crazy growth. The desire for people to drive bigger, heavier cars is just off the scale. A 60% increase in global car fleet over an 8-year period, according to CNBC. From 2010 to 2018, SUVs were the second largest contributor to the global carbon emissions behind the power industry, the study found. So you've got the power sector as the number one polluter, and if you put SUVs as their own category and strip out everything else, they are currently the second biggest polluter. That would place the category of SUVs ahead of trucks and aviation in terms of pure carbon footprint. That is the scale of the problem of people wanting to buy what my wife and I call mummy wagons. Well, thank you very much for listening to the podcast today. Question of the week this week: how can we make up for lost revenue from taxing fossil fuels when we're all driving EVs? Let me know. Email me, hello@evnewsdaily.com, and you can leave a comment on YouTube and Facebook. Well, there are 258 patrons of the podcast. Got some new friends to say hello to over the weekend and coming days. I'll let you know who they are very soon. If you want to check out what it's all about, patreon.com/evnewsdaily. My premium partners are Phil Roberts of Electric Future, Brad Crosby, and Avid Technology as well. Get all the previous shows, 613 of them in the archive, and get new shows first and free and automatically by hitting subscribe in your podcast app. Come and say hi on the socials by searching EV News Daily. Have a wonderful day. Look out for Saturday's special interview tomorrow. It's a cracker. Do have a good weekend, whatever you're doing. I'll catch you soon. Remember, there's no such thing as a self-charging hybrid.